Hi, this is Dr. Peter Hartmann with another video on a mental health topic. Today we're going to talk about 4 ways that you can solve a problem. So if you're facing one or more of life's problems and want to know how best to approach it, I'm going to suggest to you a guideline that involves 4 possibilities that narrows it down and makes problem solving more simple. There are lots of other ways to approach problem solving, but this is one that I have found very helpful and is actually quite useful when you're dealing with stress as a result of your problems. So there are 4 possible ways to deal with a problem in life. And the first option is to change it, change the situation, change the problem. So let's use a couple of examples to show what I mean. So the first example would be a woman who's unhappily married. Well, can she change it? Well, the question is how? Another example would be a college student who's struggling with poor grades. Well, how can they change that? So the first question that each of them should ask themselves is, well, how can I change it? And begin by brainstorming over possible ways. Don't be concerned about whether they are possible or whether they would work for you or not. Just put them down on paper, and then you can review them for their ability to really happen. You'll want to know what resources you would need to make those changes. So taking this example of the married woman first, could she go for marriage counseling? Could she change how she reacts to her husband? And would that make a difference? Well, what resources would she need? Well, if she thought about going to marriage counseling, does she have insurance that would cover part of it? Does she have enough money to pay for whatever co-pays there might be? Is her spouse willing to participate? Is there an available marriage counselor close enough to them that it would be practical? And what about our college student? How could he or she change the situation? Well, one possibility that he or she might think of is to drop one of the courses with the lowest grade, thus making the workload lighter, and maybe they can pull their grades up. Another option to change it might be to get tutoring, to talk to their professors and get some additional help. Well, what resources would the student need? Well, they might need the approval of their parents if they're going to consider dropping a course. There are certain financial consequences. School officials may also need to approve it. And if there's a medical or psychological reason why they're struggling, they may actually be able to get a medical withdrawal, which means they would lose some portion of the money they paid, but they will not have an F grade. So they need to find that out from school officials. Tutors need to be available, and are there ones that do it for free? And if not, can you afford it? You'll need to find out what office hours the teachers have for meeting with students if you want to use that option. So option 1 basically is to try to change the situation, change the problem in such a way that it gets resolved. Well, what if you can't figure out a way that you can realistically change the problem? Now you go to problem solution 2, and that's to leave it. Leave whatever the problem is. So again, in the case of our married woman in an unhappy marriage, she could consider separation or even divorce. Well, remember, we've asked, well, what are the consequences of that? So you need to decide whether the consequences are worth the change, the leaving that you're going to be doing. So there are financial considerations. There, in some cases, would be some risk of domestic violence, perhaps. There may be disapproval by family, friends. It might even be against your religious beliefs. Maybe you don't have any clear place where you would go. Of course, there are positives to it, a fresh start in life, and the problem will no longer be haunting you. For the college student, maybe they could drop out of school for a period of time and then ultimately change schools or go back with newer approaches to how to study and learn. But what would the consequences be? There'd be loss of money spent on tuition, books and fees, disappointment by your family, friends, and of course yourself. And there may be some financial problems that arise. So these things must all be considered when you're thinking about leaving a problem situation. Well, what do you do if you can't change it? You can't leave it. You go to option 3. Reframe it. Developing a new perspective, a new way of looking at the problem so that it's less disturbing for you. And the question is, how could you think about your problem differently so it will be more acceptable? A way to change your perspective so that the problem seems to be less of a problem. The question is, what is a different way you could think about your situation? So let's again turn to our unhappily married woman. Maybe she could think it through and realize that maybe her expectations are unrealistic, and that's why she's unhappy. A lot of people would say that the real causes of upset are unfulfilled expectations and undelivered communications. So maybe she had expectations in marriage that are not realistic, and she needs to change her perspective. And then she will be more accepting and be less distressed. She may ask herself if she's making mountains out of molehills. For example, maybe he is sloppy. But realistically, it's annoying, but it's not so important as to end a marriage. So maybe I can learn how to manage that without it upsetting me so much. And what about our college student? Well, perhaps they could think, you know what? I'm doing the best I can, and if my grades are as I fear, then I'll have to find a different solution at that point. But right now, I'll just do the best I can. Another option would be to say, you know what, my friends tell me I'm a worrier, and I exaggerate how poorly I am doing, and I am making myself upset unnecessarily. They think that I'm actually doing pretty well. What I really need is to learn how to be more realistic and more accepting of the way things are, because in reality, they usually turn out a whole lot better than I fear. I am a worrier. Well, what if you can't change the situation, you can't leave it, and you can't think of any helpful way to reframe it? Now you're left with the option, option 4. You have to accept it as unchangeable. It is what it is. And so some people would say you also might think of it as being inevitable, since it can't be changed, left, or reframed. But regardless, you're now left with learning how to accept what cannot be changed, left, or reframed. One common way this has been thought of before is the SERENITY prayer. Give me the courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. But in addition to kind of looking at it that way, you may wish to seek help from a therapist, especially a therapist who's trained in acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. It's a newer form of therapy that's highly effective for learning to accept the unchangeable things in life, such as having chronic pain or what have you. Alternatively, if that's not an option, you could learn and utilize mindfulness techniques, which can also be very powerful in helping you with acceptance of things that you cannot change, leave, or reframe. In fact, mindfulness is one of the tools that's used in acceptance and commitment therapy. So to summarize, there are 4 ways, and only 4 ways, that you can deal with a problem in life. You can change it, you can leave it, you can reframe it, or you can accept it. And I hope this approach is useful to you. It's fairly simple and straightforward. That's one of its advantages. If you find this presentation to be helpful to you, please hit the like button and feel free to sign up, and we will talk with you the next time.